All right, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back again. It's about 2 minutes till class time. So anyway, hope everyone's doing well for now, and I'll be right with you guys in just a few. Hello.
Hi.
Hey. Good morning, Kylie. Hi, Angel. Welcome back, guys. Hey, Brandon. Good morning, Sebastian. Good to see you. Hey, Zoe. Okay, just a few seconds here. Sydney, hey, Annabella, welcome. Okay, guys, so let's just get things rolling one more time here. We have, first of all, hope you all had a great weekend, and it's good to be with you guys as usual. Here we are, and we've come to the last week of last week of classes before we have finals week next week. And so we're down to the last couple of meetings. Today we're going to have a lecture to finish off the work of Derek Parfit, and then we're going to have 2 review sessions to follow this week on Wednesday and Friday. You guys have the study guide now, so hopefully you've been able to start at least taking a look at some of the topics, and you can decide on what kind of questions you want to ask, if any, about the different selected items on the list. And we'll have 2 meetings to do that, as well as some office hour availability that I'll make for you guys this week as well. So today then, we just have to finalize the notes on Derek Parfit, and we'll try to get into just a brief discussion of Thomas Nagel's essay about death. And then that kind of ends the semester of new material today. So as usual, I just want to say I really appreciate your hard work and sticking through it all semester. I mean, it's tough anyway to take classes during the pandemic. Philosophy is a tricky concept, but we've been in this together, and I'm glad that you guys have stuck with it, those that have anyway. So, okay, let's go back into the work of Derek Parfit. Derek Parfit is a British philosopher who lived from 1942 to 2017. And we're reading a piece of his from 1986 called What Makes Someone's Life Go Best. How does a person live their best life? What would be the way of doing that overall? And he starts the paper by saying, okay, this is a paper from 1986, but anyway, he starts it off by saying there are 3 different theories of self-interest. To understand what would make someone's life go best, you kind of have to at least consider what your theory of self-interest is. In other words, what do you think makes someone's self-interest go up? What do you think it is that promotes or adds to a person's well-being and self-interest? So he says there's at least 3 theories of this. One of them he calls hedonistic theories of self-interest. So this is all review of what we did Friday, just to start. So the hedonistic theories say that the best thing for you would be whatever makes you the happiest or creates the most pleasure for you. So what's the best life? What's the goal? According to hedonistic theories, have as much fun and pleasure as possible. The more of that you're having, the better your life is. He says the most plausible version of these hedonistic theories of self-interest are what he calls preference hedonism. Preference hedonism meaning that whether 1 out of 2 actions is, I guess, more pleasurable or for a person depends on what they prefer. So we can't just say without qualification which actions are the pleasurable ones. We need to know about the individual preferences of specific people. So anyway, that's one theory. According to it, based on your preferences, pursue the things that promote happiness and pleasure for you, and the more you have, the better. Another theory of self-interest, which is a little different, is desire fulfillment theories. These theories say that the best thing for you to do would be to fulfill the different desires that you have and accomplish them. So it's a little different than the hedonistic theories because sometimes the fulfillment of desires are things that you don't find pleasure in as you're going through the processes to get to the end results. Also, on the desire fulfillment theory, it could be that some of your desires are either fulfilled or unfulfilled after you're gone or in ways that you're not aware of. So he gave an example of like a person who starts a business and it does succeed, but after they have died. This would still be, he thinks, credited as a fulfilled desire on their record of how well their life went that would be awarded to them posthumously. So on the hedonistic theories, you have to, of course, experience something in order for it to be pleasurable for you. On the desire fulfillment theories, even though sometimes, of course, there will be pleasure in the fulfillment of these desires, it is the fulfillment themselves that matters more than the experience of the pleasure. And now in a third possible account, the theory of self-interest was called the objective list theory. This one said that it's not so much about getting the things that please you or that you feel desire to get, but rather just getting the things that are objectively good for people to have in general. So according to this view, there are some things that are just good for us, whether we like it or not, and there are some things that are bad for us, whether we like that or not. And on the objective list theory, we should try our best to achieve all of the objectively good things. So what could some of those things be? I don't know, morality, intelligence, the cultivation of your talents, wealth, health, wisdom, the appreciation of beauty. So if these are objectively good things, then the best life is one that satisfies all of those, even if the person doesn't feel a particular interest or inclination towards them. If they're objectively good, then it's not just up to an individual's preference. Okay, now from there, there was some discussion to follow about how the desire fulfillment theory, he thought, is more plausible in its what he calls success version rather than the unrestricted version. So he subdivides the desire fulfillment theory into two possible variants. One he calls the unrestricted version, which he thinks is too much, and so he sets that to the side. On the unrestricted version of the desire fulfillment theory, all your desires matter towards the question of how well your life is going, even those that don't have anything to do with your own life or your own goals. He gave a case of somebody who, let's say, is suffering from a cancer diagnosis and they're trying to beat it, and you just meet this person casually in a chance encounter, but you end up liking them and hoping, desiring, in other words, that they will recover. He says that if this person does happen to recover down the line later, that doesn't, in his judgment, really lead to an improvement in your quality of life. Not so much because it's not something you're aware of, but rather because it's a fulfilled desire that doesn't have anything to do with a goal or a project that you started with. So he thinks that the more reasonable version of the desire fulfillment theory is not the unrestricted one, but one that does restrict and narrow down the targeted desires to those that bear on your own goals and projects. So that's what he calls the success version of the desire fulfillment theory. After that, I think that we were running out of time as I started to try and talk to you about the two different types of desires, local and global, right? So local desires would be just desires for like particular things that you can satisfy pretty much in the short term. So think of just tangible, specific items, like if you have a desire for a new shirt or, you know, a video game console or specific type of meal for lunch, then those are things that you can and do fulfill in the immediate short term. It doesn't take like a lifelong ambition to get those things. On the other hand, there are global desires, and those are the big picture desires that are about your whole life or a large part of it. So if you have a desire to have a good education or a career or a stable family, or to have happy children, to make an impact on the world, to be moral, these desires and things are big picture desires, and that's why he calls them global ones. He was making the case that if you had to weigh the local versus the global desires against one another, that it would be the global desires that matter more, that have heavier value and weight in comparison to the local ones. And he has a pair of examples that he gave to try and illustrate that. So I think that was the last point that we did get to cover, because one of these examples says, did we talk about the drug injection thing? Yeah. So in one example, he says, suppose that I was going to offer to give you an injection of a drug that would instantly transform you into a total addict of that drug. So you want the drug after that, and you have desires to use it all the time. But suppose that I backed this offer with also a lifetime supply of the same drug. So every time you want it, you won't lack for supply, and you'll be able to satisfy each desire. Question he said is, does this sound like your common sense tells you this is going to improve your life if I do this? And he believes that most all would agree, no, it's not an improvement to your life. But why not? Because if you look at it just from the point of view of desires, I'm introducing a whole new level of desires for this drug by giving you the injection. And I'm also giving you the means to always satisfy those. So isn't this a proposal that will give you a lot of desire fulfillment and therefore improves your life? And he says, no, it's really not, though, because although the desires that you will fulfill will be the local desire for the drug use, it will stand in the way of a global desire that you had to maintain your good health and your non-addictive status throughout life. And so even though many more quantitatively numerous local desires could be satisfied, they are so much less important than the one big picture global desire that they frustrate, that this demonstrates the greater value of the global desires over the local ones. And the same pattern would kind of hold in any case where a person could opt for a more numerous range of short-term desires, but by doing that, they would throw off their ability to pursue or satisfy some of the bigger ones. Like, say someone wanted to drop out of school just to like party and have a lot of fun for like a solid year, in that way, maybe they're no longer able to attain the big picture goal of having a good career and education and also knowledge. But they're going for the local desires, which, according to his argument anyway, would be the wrong way to go because they don't matter as much as the global ones. Another example that he gave, okay, and now this is getting into something I didn't have time to cover on Friday last week. Another example to make the same kind of point, okay, let me give you another hypothetical here. So it's another thing where I say, hey, here's two options for you. So let me hit you with these two options, okay? And you can tell me which one you think would be the better life. Okay, so option number one is this. You get 50 years. And the thing is, in this 50-year option, it's 50 amazing years because it's 50 years of the highest quality life you can imagine from the standpoint of all your global desires. We're going to say they're fully satisfied and maxed out. So in option number one, the 50-year choice, you've got health, wealth, wisdom. You're very moral. You're very rational and knowledgeable. Everyone loves you. You love other people. You have solid relationships that are deep, that are long-lasting. So it's almost like just an ideal existence. But the catch is that it's 50 years. Okay, so it's not unlimited. You get 50 years of that at the total height of human, satisfaction. But after the 50-year period, it's just like Cinderella. You just poof, you're gone. You die right there. Okay, so 50 years. Option number two. So I'll start off option two with what's, I guess, attractive about it, which is that it's not limited to a 50-year span. In fact, let's say that it's an open-ended, indefinite amount of time. So it could be thousands and thousands, millions of years, right? It could be infinite time. So that's really nice. There's no I should say, limit to the lifespan. But in option two, I guess the drawback is that although you get all this time, you're going to spend it all kind of like living in like a prison environment. Now, it's not going to be like some brutal prison where you're mistreated or abused. Let's just suppose that it's very, very civilized and well accommodated, but it's a prison. So there's a lot of things, obviously, you can't do in a prison. Like you can't pursue your, education or career goals or travel plans or all the relationships that you'd like to have or have a family. So one option, 50 years, maxed out for all of your global desires. The other option, as much time as you like, but kind of living in this really not so stimulating and boring and frustrating prison scenario. So he thinks that in giving those two options, most people would side with one over the other as the better life. I don't know which of the two you think is better, but there's a clear winner to the author. And maybe even if you're just going to guess what he thought was the more plausible and attractive package there, what do you think it would be? So that's something for you in this chat. Just let me know. You've got the 50-year thing with all of your global desires fully maxed out, and then you got an indefinite lifespan in the prison. So Cordy, you're going with the first. Good. And although I guess it's a matter for some judgment, the author thinks that that's what would be the dominant common sense response by most people. But let's try and explain why he thinks that helps to support his argument that the global desires matter more. Because if you just look at the second option, which has an open-ended amount of time, if we extend that timeline out long enough, then there's going to be a lot of little local desires that you're going to satisfy that in the end would add up to more just in terms of quantity. So like what kind of, it's not absolutely like there's no pleasure at all. I mean, in that second scenario, there are some things that you could sort of enjoy. Like what if you worked out or whatever in the yard, or you had a nice conversation with another inmate, or you enjoyed the meal at the lunch hall one day. So you might say that these little daily desires are like a little drop in the bucket of desire satisfaction. And if we have like thousands, whatever, millions of years, then just in terms of pure numbers, that's going to be more numerically desires that are satisfied in the second option. But what he thinks you are revealing by going for the first option is that it's not just about quantity, but it's about quality as well. So in the first option, you don't have as much time. But the quality of the desires that are fulfilled are much more important because they're the biggest things that we care about the most. Having good relationships, being smart, being moral, having success in career and in everything else. And of course, financial success and stability is part of this first option too. So anyway, he thinks that by opting for the first, you thus agree with him that the global desires have greater weight, that they're heavier in terms of their importance than the local ones. And here I'll just read from the author's words, and you can see his point on that. He says, so about I'll read about both the addiction one and then the 50 years versus open-ended lifespan. So he says, on the theories that say we just add up your desires and the local ones too, if I make you an addict, I'll be increasing the sum total of your desire fulfillment. But I will be causing one of your desires not to be fulfilled, your desire not to become a drug addict, which after the injection becomes a desire to be cured. But I will also be giving you an indefinite series of extremely strong desires, one each morning, all of which you can fulfill. The fulfillment of all these desires would outweigh the non-fulfillment of your desire not to become an addict and to be cured. So on a theory that says the local desires are just as important, I would be making your life better. But that's not plausible. Having these desires and having them fulfilled are neither pleasant nor painful. We need not be hedonists to believe that it is in no way better for you to have and fulfill this strong set of addictive desires. And then he goes down and says, bless you, global desires give you the right answer in the case where I would make you an addict. You would prefer not to become addicted, and you would later prefer to cease to be addicted. And these are the only preferences to which the global theories apply. They ignore your particular desire each morning for a fresh injection, since you've already considered these desires in forming your global preference. And then he says, this is similar to another case, or any case in which if someone's life went in one of two ways, this would produce a greater sum total of local desire satisfaction, but that it would offset the pursuit and satisfaction of your global desires. So he gives one more imaginary case. He says, suppose that I could either have 50 years of life of extremely high quality, or an indefinite number of years that are barely worth living. In the first alternative, my 50 years would on any theory go extremely well. I would be very happy, achieve great things, do much good, love and be loved by many people. In the second alternative, my life would always be, though not by much, worth living. There would be nothing bad about it, and it would each day contain a few small pleasures. So if the local desires adding up over time was all that mattered, then that would be better for me to take the longer lifespan option. In each day within the life, I would have some desires about my life that are fulfilled. In the 50 years of the first option, there would be a great sum total of local desire satisfaction, but it would be finite. And in the end, it would be outweighed by the sum of desire fulfillment in the longer other alternative. The first alternative would be good. In the second alternative, since my life is worth living, living each extra day is good. And if we merely add together whatever is good for me, some number of these extra days would produce a greater sum total of desire fulfillment. But now to his real point, he says, I don't think that the second alternative would give me a better life. And therefore, I reject these theories that say you just aggregate all of your local desires to see how well your life has gone. Okay, and since the global theories would imply that the first alternative gives me a better life, the alternative in which you have the 50-year option, then those theories seem to me to be more plausible. Okay, so now at the end of his essay, there's one more piece of info that we really have to be clear on. Because you might be wondering, well, what is Derek Parfit's view then about what makes your life go best? He's presented different theories of self-interest, but he hasn't exactly sided with any of them definitively. So now I'm ready to tell you at the end of the essay what he does say is his own view about the best life. And it's interesting because what he does is he kind of creates a combination of two different theories of self-interest that he's described, and he thinks that when you blend them together, when you merge them into one, that gives you the right idea of how to live a best life. So here's Derek Parfit's view. I'll put on the board Parfit's view of what makes a person's life go best. Okay, so what he does is he holds a combination of the desire fulfillment theories and the objective list theory. Okay, so a combination, a mixture of these two theories of self-interest, of the desire fulfillment theory in its like global success version, and the objective list theory. And to be precise, here's how he says to blend them together. He says, basically, make yourself desire the things that are on the objective list. If you don't already, then just make that happen. Force it if you need to. Make yourself desire the things on the objective list. And then, now that those are your desires, then fulfill them. And then if that's what you do, he says, you will be getting the best of these two theories, the best of both worlds. And that's why he thinks this is the right theory, without being supplemented by the other theory of self-interest. He thinks that each of these are halfway correct, but they're missing something that the other side offers. Okay, so let me try and explain to you why he thinks that the desire fulfillment theory by itself is not accurate because it's missing something that the objective list theory provides, and vice versa. Why he thinks that the objective list theory is not fully satisfactory because it's missing an aspect that the desire fulfillment theory provides. Okay, so here's a question, then think about this. Based off of the desire fulfillment theory, which again says, if you want to live your best life, fulfill as many of your desires as you can anybody think of what could be problematic about that proposal? Like what could be wrong, scary, dangerous, bad, etc., about a person who says, my plan in life is to get everything I desire? What could be wrong with that? What could be troubling, concerning about a person whose motive and goal is to fulfill all their desires? What could go wrong? Can you think of anything that could possibly be not good about the goal of fulfilling all your desires?
Could like harm people.
Okay, yeah, so if what?
If like the desire was to like didn't like a person.
Sure, okay, good. So you can say in the chat, and it's I think a clear point, right? It's possible for people to have desires for things that are bad. It's possible for people to have evil, sadistic, harmful desires, and in some cases even self-destructive ones, but let's focus on harm to others. Have there ever been people in this world who have had the desire to kill people? Surely there have been, yes. It's not a hypothetical, it's not a fiction. I mean, you guys have watched enough Netflix, I'm sure, to know that there's a lot of people out there that want to kill people, rape them, torture people, even commit genocide. So there's a lot of bad desires. I mean, it's not like everyone's desires are wholesome and, righteous and just. There are people whose goal in life is to kill as many people as possible and get away with it. And sadly, there are people who actually do these things. And so suppose that there was a person who is a very accomplished serial killer that never got caught by anybody because of the skill with which they disposed of bodies and evidence and everything else. This person might go to their grave with a smile thinking, I did it. Everything I wanted, I did. I wanted to kill 100 people, and I certainly did, and that was my desires. I fulfilled them. Do you really want to say to that person that they lived a good life, though? I mean, they fulfilled desires of a kind, but these are not good desires to fulfill. And so the author says, clearly we should have some sense that just fulfilling your desires with no constraints whatsoever is not always going to be a good life. Let's go to some really horrible examples like Adolf Hitler. Okay, so Hitler was the leader of Germany during the Holocaust, as you guys know, which exterminated like 5 million Jewish people, and he was bent on trying to like annihilate the entire Jewish community, certainly within, Germany and Europe. Now, he achieved a lot of things in his life, I guess, that he wanted. He became like a leader of a nation, and he, made a lot of progress towards his horrible and disgusting goal of trying to exterminate a whole race of people. And he was never even held accountable, right? He committed suicide. So he could have, died thinking, I did everything I set out to do in this life, so I'm fulfilled. But does anybody think that that's a good life just because it was fulfillment of a kind? Again, most would say no. So I'm going with some obvious examples just to kind of hit you over the head with the idea that not every person's life that fulfills desires should be credited with being good or a good life well lived. So that's the problem. Desires, they're good to satisfy, but sometimes they're wrong, and sometimes they're for bad things that are not good. Therefore, if we just say your best life is to fulfill your desires, what's to tell a person then that they should not kill people if that's what they desire? Okay, now on the other hand, the objective list theory, it doesn't have the problem that says you might end up doing bad things if you follow this theory, because it controls the nature of what you're supposed to get by saying it's objectively good. It's not up to the individual's perception or perspective. But on the objective list theory, there could be a complaint there as well. Okay, so let's suppose that on the objective list theory, there are things like this: being healthy, being wise, being moral, being able to appreciate beauty, having love and good relationships. I don't know. So suppose that these are like objectively good things, and a person is getting all those things. So according to the theory, they're living their best life. But what could be a complaint about that whole theory? Like, what could be the issue with a person who's getting all these objectively good things? How could one argue that maybe that still doesn't seem like a satisfied or fulfilled life? Can you tell me this? So you seem to be able to pick up pretty clearly on what the problem with desire fulfillment could be. That's good, that the desires can sometimes be like horrible and not to be rewarded as a good thing, even when they're fulfilled. What could be the problematic complaint about the objective list theory, which says get all the objectively good things, no, never mind whether you desire them or not? What's the problem there? I mean, suppose that someone tells you that's how you're supposed to live. Do you think that you could find any room for criticism to say, I don't know if this is going to be a best life? Why not? Just tell me what's wrong with the objective list theory, if anything, if you can think of something wrong. But I think there is he makes the point, and it's a clear point. What could be the complaint, problem, etc., with following that blueprint? Just get all the objectively good things. Never mind about whether you care about them or desire them. They're objectively good, so it's not up to you, the individual. Go ahead and get those things.
If you don't want them, then it's like that.
Okay, good. Once again, Sydney, good. That's right. So if you can say that. So one comment I'm seeing from the student in class is this. Don't you understand that sometimes people won't care about those things, though? Like, even if they're objectively good, some people will just think, I'm going through the motions here. This is what, like, society or, people in general expect of me. I'm supposed to live up to these standards. But I don't really care so much about it. If it was just me, I'd rather be doing something else with my life. So we can imagine a person who checks off all these things on the list, but they just feel like I'm not fulfilled because I don't even care about these things. I don't really want them. So like they're going to school, they're getting a big education, but they're like, who cares? I don't care about this. Or they're building a nice family, and it's a really solid, stable family, but they're like, I don't know. It's not really necessarily something that I wanted, but it's something that society tells me I ought to want. So they're being moral. They're going to the opera, trying to like take in the finer things, but they're like, when am I going to start liking any of this stuff? This is all boring. To me, I don't like it. Okay, so there's the two objections. And Angel, you make the same point. People who don't experience the same amount of satisfaction with the same set of objectively good things. Correct. So here is the state of play. To the desire fulfillment theory, one problematic thing is that maybe some people have evil desires, and we certainly don't want to say that's a good life. On the other hand, though, with the objective list theory, there could be a person going through the motions doing all these things, but they feel like this is cookie cutter and they don't even care. They don't desire it. So they're missing the feeling of fulfillment. So in the world of Parfit, we should bring these two theories together and they complement each other and give us the right idea in the end. So here's what he said. The things on the objective list, if you don't already desire them, we need to force you to desire them. You need to make it happen for yourself. So make yourself desire those things. If you don't care about being smart, moral, appreciate beauty, then you need to change. Something's wrong with you then. If you don't care about being wise or rational or moral, there's nothing wrong with those goals. There's something wrong with you. So you need to get your mind right and start wanting the things that are on this list, one way or the other, whatever needs to happen, force it to happen. But once you desire those things, once you genuinely want them for yourself, not just saying other people want them for me, I want them. Once you desire the things on the objective list, then go ahead and fulfill those desires, because now you're going to get the best of both worlds. So in that case, are you getting everything that you want? Yes, you're fulfilled. So you have desires that are fulfilled. But are these desires objectively good? Also, yes, because you've made your desires align with what is objectively good. So he says this would be the best thing you could possibly do. You'd get the best of both theories. You'd get objectively good things in your life, but you would also feel the satisfaction that comes with wanting those things. Okay, so to those people that are serial killers that want to kill people, their desires are bad and they need to change what they desire so that they desire things that are not bad, but that are instead good. And then when they desire those things, the fulfillment of them will be part two. Okay, so you fulfill the things you want and they're also objectively good. Now let me read here from the author's words and we'll close his discussion. So he said this. So at the end, he says, which of the theories should we accept? I'll end by mentioning a theory which might be claimed to combine what is most plausible in these different theories. It's a striking fact that those who have addressed this question have disagreed so fundamentally. Many philosophers have been convinced hedonists, and many others have been convinced that hedonism is gross and a mistake. Some hedonists have reached their view as follows. They consider an opposing view, such as that which claims that what is good for someone is to have knowledge, to be rational, and to be aware of true beauty. The hedonist asks, would those states of mind be good if they brought no enjoyment, and if the person in the states of mind had not the slightest desire for them? Since they answer no, they conclude that the value of these states of mind must be in their being liked, and in the desire for them to continue. This reasoning assumes that the value of a whole is just the sum of the value of its parts. If we remove the part to which the hedonist appeals, what is left seems to have no value, and therefore hedonism is the truth. Suppose instead, now Parfit adds, more plausibly, that the value of the whole may not be the mere sum of the value of the parts. We might then claim that what is best for people is a combination. It is not just being in the conscious state that you want to be in, nor is it just having knowledge, engaging in reason, being aware of beauty, and the like. What is good for someone is neither just what the hedonist says, nor just what is said by the objective list theory. We might believe that if we had either of these without the other, what we would be of no value. We might claim, for example, that what is good or bad for someone is to have knowledge, to be reasonable, to experience love, to be aware of beauty, while strongly wanting these things. On this view, each side in the disagreement sees only half of the truth. Each put forward as sufficient something that was only necessary. Pleasure with many other kinds of object has no value, and if they are entirely devoid of pleasure, then there is no value in knowledge, reason, love, or the awareness of beauty. What is of value, or is good for someone, is to have both, to be engaged in these activities and to desire to be so engaged. So that is kind of how he finishes, and it's an interesting hybrid of a more objective and subjective view of what makes life go well. Looking back at the other authors that we've already talked about, Plato said that everybody should try to empower their reason. And so it kind of looks like it's an objectivist account. If you don't like to be smart, time to get smart, because that's what a good life is, to make sure that the rational part of your soul dominates over your spirited and appetitive nature. With Sartre, though, the existentialist, he said there's no individual pattern of the best life. Everyone creates their own essence. Everyone's essence reflects not only how they think they should live, but how they think people in general should live. So we can just compare different essences and see that each one reflects the person's perspective of a good life. Now, that's very subjectivist, because it says there's no universal account and everyone has their own essence to be created with their freedom. Now we see Parfit with a sort of blend. Parfit says that fulfilling the things that you subjectively desire is important because that's what makes you feel satisfied. But also, you shouldn't just say that any desire that you fulfill is good to fulfill in and of itself, because as we have said, there are some that are evil, destructive, and downright wrong. So how about merge the two together by making it so that your own desires match to what's objectively good to the best degree possible, and then fulfill those. So the pursuit of these desires will be at once fulfilling and also wholesome and righteous and objectively good. So that's kind of Parfit's account at the end. And it's a little blend of both a more subjective and objective standpoint. I told you then that there would be one last author and topic to try and cover at the end of today, and we do have a little time left, so I at least want to make a few points about the last reading. And that's by Thomas Nagel. It's called Death. So let me just say a few things about his work, and that'll end our meeting today. Then we will have 2 review sessions coming up this week to wrap up the course before we take the final. Okay, so one more guy, Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel, born in 1937, still alive unless I'm incorrect, but as last I checked, he's still there. And this is a paper of his from 1970, which is well known in the philosophy world. It's just called Death. Thomas Nagel teaches or has taught at New York University, which is probably considered the most elite institution just for pure philosophy in the United States, and one of the biggest in the whole world. I mean, there's a lot of great departments. UCLA, where I went, is another good one, I think. But NYU, there's a lot of very famous philosophers there. It's got like a star-studded faculty. So he's one of them there. His paper, Death, from 1970. It's got a simple question that it's trying to address. And the question is death bad? What do you think? Is it bad or not? So about death. It's just a true and obviously disturbing fact that everything dies, that all living things are set to perish because we have a finite lifespan. We're finite beings. So in philosophy, as in life, we ask, how should we confront that? Is it something to be feared and dreaded? Is it a bad thing? Or are those common attitudes mistaken, and the significance of death is not that it's bad? Thomas Nagel studies the question, and he tries to take view of the more negative side of that response. So his own view is towards the negative, that it is a bad thing. Perhaps it's not a most shocking conclusion that death is bad, but he does think it's bad, and he wants to try and provide a philosophical justification for that instead of just relying on the common kind of consensus view that's unanalyzed for the most part. So he starts off his paper with this question to the reader. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that death was really the end of your consciousness. That's a hypothetical, by the way. He's saying, I want you to just take that as a given for the sake of discussion. Obviously, in reality, no one can prove this, and most, or if not many, believe in the afterlife. But let's set that aside for the moment and just pretend that death was really the end of your consciousness, meaning that it would just be no further conscious survival, just the final end, like you don't exist anymore and you never would again. If that was the end of your life, if that's how death was, the permanent destruction of your consciousness, would that be a bad thing? So that is his question. He's asking if whether death in that sense would be a bad thing or not. So he's not asking if death would be a bad thing if, supposing there was an afterlife and you get to go to heaven. We're asking, would death be a bad thing if, suppose, it was really the end? He's not saying that he knows that death is the end. Of course, as I've said, we can't prove that, but it's an important question to ask, even if it's just hypothetical or theoretical. Because look, if you believe in the afterlife, then I would assume that you think it's a good thing that there's an afterlife. But if you think that that's good, then this can only be a judgment that you form by contrast when you think about how bad it would be if there was no such thing as the afterlife, right? So it's an important question, even if we're fully convinced in the existence of the afterlife, because it will give us a sense of why we think it's so important and valuable to hold on to that idea, because we're looking at the hypothetical contrast according to which there would not be any. So if death was the end, would it be bad? Now, there are very different views about this that some have expressed. Some say, I guess the common idea is that, yes, it's the worst thing you could possibly imagine, because if you don't exist, then you're losing everything, literally. And what could be a bigger loss? Other people, though, and there's a tradition in this dating back to ancient Greek philosophy, other people say, no, it's not bad, because assuming that you don't exist anymore, then there's no subject to experience any loss. So, if you're not there to be experiencing the discomfort, the sort of disappointment of not existing anymore, then that can't really be anything that's bad for you, the subject. Well, anyway, the author he sides with the negative view, and now I'm going to tell you why. Why does he think death is bad? Well, he thinks it's bad for a basic reason, because according to the way he's described it, end of consciousness, death would be bad because it deprives you of the enjoyment of the goods of life. Okay, so let me say this. claim by the author, death is bad. Death in the sense of like the destruction of the consciousness is bad because it deprives the subject of the quote-unquote goods of life. Okay, so that's why he thinks it's a bad thing. Because if it's the end, then it takes away your ability to enjoy all the different goods of life. Now, what are these goods of life? Goods of life is a phrase that he uses to just refer to very baseline things about being alive that you like, that you want to continue, that you desire for them to persist on. So in stating the goods of life, I want you to really think of the big picture. You can't think of things that are particular to like our current day and circumstance, because those are not goods of life that speak to the whole human condition, right? Like, so if you say one of the goods of life is, I don't know, playing video games or something, well, it is a good thing. Yes, I agree. But it's not something that people could have enjoyed 100 years ago. So it's not deeply rooted enough in the human condition per se. So when you think of goods of life, you have to reach for things that are good at any time, at any point in history, just about being alive and period. So what are some of the goods of life? They're very fundamental things that you're all experiencing and enjoying right now. So like one of them could be just perception, the ability to perceive things with either sight, taste, touch, hearing, or smell. Your five senses work. In some cases, I guess some people have a few that don't work, but in any case, that's one of the things that you want about life. You want to keep being able to perceive things. It's not just perception either. What about just thought? Anything going on in your mind, mental activity. If you're thinking about what you're going to do later today, or you're thinking back to memories that you've had in the past, hopes, dreams, imaginations, memories, that's all the mental life. And as we've studied consciousness, if death was the destruction of consciousness, then you couldn't have thought anymore. So that's another good of life that you want to continue. Activity, okay? Activity is a very broad category. It covers all the activities, whether it's playing sports, playing music, going to class, taking notes, riding a bike, at anything whatsoever. All activities are not capable of being done by, a dead thing, a dead person. So another one of the goods of life that death, in the sense described by the author, would deprive you of. And desire, wanting things, and seeking to fulfill them. That's a major part of life too, and you could call that one of the goods of life. So he says that if death is a bad thing, it's because it takes away the subject's ability to continue the enjoyment of the goods of life. Now, these goods of life that are mentioned here, they don't always necessarily create happiness in every single case, right? Like sometimes you'll take on an activity and you take on an injury because of it. Now you regretted that activity, but it's still something that you want to have activities in general, right? Even when once in a while, these goods of life produce dissatisfaction, loss, disappointment. I could put relationships, another one, right? Another very fundamental good of life. That's probably important enough to put on the board. And my current point that I'm trying to make here is that sometimes, it's not 100% of thoughts, activities, relationships that always make you happy. Sometimes you have a relationship, at the end of it makes you less happy than if it had never happened at all. Or, you get a thought in your head and it's a disturbing thought and you'd rather have not thought about it at all. But even in some cases, when we have negative experiences along these lines, we don't want the whole good of life to stop. It's not like you have one bad activity and you're like, I don't want activities ever again. Or you desired something and fulfilling it didn't make you happy, and now you say, I don't want any more desires. Or you had a relationship that was kind of a bad ending, and then you say, I don't want to have relationships at all anymore. I mean, of course, there are some people that will say such things, but aside from like the suicidally depressed, most of us want to continue enjoying the goods of life. Otherwise, we would have no motive to live. So we all want these goods of life to continue. If death is the end, then it erases and eliminates them, and that's why he thinks it would be considered a bad thing. So we desire to continue enjoying the goods of life, even when we're not in perfect circumstances. That's why we sometimes say things like, it's good just to be alive. It's good just to be able to breathe, to get up, to have another 24, or whatever people say. So that's why he says death is a bad thing, guys. You're getting to the core of his argument in the essay. It's bad. Why? Not because of something that it's like, because the subject doesn't exist, but rather because it's the deprivation and destruction of those goods of life. Now, he makes a brief point here to say that when he speaks of death, he means death in the ultimate sense, not like death of the temporary kind. Maybe some of you have heard of cases where a person said, I got into a tough accident and I had cardiac arrest and I was actually flatlined for 5 minutes. I was dead for 5 minutes until they used defibrillators and injection of adrenaline into my heart, and they were able to revive me. But being revived after a period of like flatlining or whatever would not be considered death in the sense defined by the author, because he means like the real thing where you never come back. If there were cryogenic chambers, like some rich people putting their bodies in these cryogenic chambers, freezing their corpse, hoping that future technology will be able to revive frozen biological material, I don't think the scientific prospects are very good for that, given the fact of entropy. But anyway, suppose that it was possible, and someday they successfully did such a thing. That would also not be death in the sense described by the author, because it would be like a temporary period of unconsciousness followed by the reestablishment of the person's mind and brain. So he's talking about death in the final sense, just a point to mention. Okay, now that's his argument, and he knows that just as always in philosophy, there are going to be some objections. So let me try to say a few things about the objections that are made against this point. He raises 3 that he thinks people may report back. 3 objections to the claim that death is bad because it deprives the subject of the goods of life. So here are 3 objections mentioned in the paper by Thomas Nagel. By the way, this is Thomas Nagel, no relation to Ernest Nagel that we studied earlier in the semester, just a coincidence there. But anyway, 3 objections. So one of them is this. It's kind of phrased as a question, if you will. The question of the objection is, how can something be bad for a person without being unpleasant to the person? Kind of like what you don't know can't hurt you kind of idea. How can something be bad for a person, death, if they can't experience it? How can something be bad for a person without being unpleasant to that person? So if the person does not exist because they're dead, then they're not upset at the fact that they don't exist. So how can anything be bad for them since they're not even there? Another objection could be this question. When or how do you assign the misfortune? When does this so-called misfortune actually happen? Because, I'll explain in a minute, when do so like when, at what point in time do you assign the misfortune of so-called death? Because while the person is alive, so this is an argument that's been around in philosophy for thousands of years, going back to the ancient Greek Stoics and Epicureans. So they say, like, while you're still alive, you're not dead by definition. A living person is not dead. So you don't experience death at all for the whole time period that you're alive. But then when you're no longer alive, then you don't exist according to this description of death. So now there's no person anymore to feel disappointment or loss. So it's sort of like while you're alive, you haven't experienced the misfortune. And then when you're dead, there's nobody there to experience anything. So it's like you never experienced the misfortune at all. And then the third possible objection is this. Why do we have different attitudes towards non-existence after life as opposed to non-existence prior to birth? Why are there different attitudes about non-existence after death versus, on the other hand, non-existence before you were ever conceived, so prior to life? Okay, why different attitudes about not existing later versus not having existed before? Okay, so thinking about non-existence. When you contemplate not existing in the future, in other words, being dead, it's like disturbing. It's dreadful, it's like not a nice thought. And it bothers people, it scares them and stuff. But nobody seems to care at all about all the billions of years that you already didn't exist before. So like when you think of 1950, you're not like, ooh, it gives me the creeps. I get a chill every time I think of myself not existing back then. Nobody cares about that. But when you anticipate maybe 2150 and not being alive then, that does kind of make you sad or bother you. But a person might argue, Shouldn't the attitudes be the same? I mean, if it didn't bother you that you didn't exist before, then why would it bother that you won't exist later? It's like this non-existent sandwich, and you're the meat in the middle. And like before you, there's this whole span of time where you weren't there, and then after the time period is over, you won't be there again. So shouldn't we have the same kind of casual, could care less attitude about future non-existence that we have about prior? Okay, well, those are objections. Now, Nagel, of course, is defending the view that it is bad. And so what does he say to the objections? Well, he gives an interesting hypothetical to deal with a couple of them. The hypothetical that he mentions is something about a person that's an adult like us who suffers a terrible head injury, and then afterwards their cognitive level has been reduced down to like an infant child. So now they need to be fed, changed, and everything taken care of for them because they've lost their higher cognitive function and motor ability. But let's suppose that this same person who's suffered the injury, because of the nature of the injury, they do not remember anything about who they were or what level of function they had before it. So they're actually just as happy and content as who? As an actual baby that's being well cared for. Now, if you think that what you don't know can't hurt you, then you might say this is no misfortune because the person doesn't seem to understand that they've lost anything. But Nagel says that reasonably, we can still claim this is a misfortune because all third-person parties that observe can just tell that there's been a loss of prior cognitive function to the current state. And so, like if you compared this actual adult that's suffering with the cognitive functioning of an infant to a real infant, the infant's not suffering a misfortune because when you compare their past to their current situation, there's no loss there. That's different from the adult. When you look at their past, they were fully functional mentally, now they're not. So that is a loss. Even if the person's not aware of it, it's still a loss. So in the same sense of death, he says that after death, the person, of course, can't be experiencing the loss and they are not aware of it. So they're not bothered. But if we just look at two stages of time, prior to that, they were alive, enjoying all the goods of life. Now they're not. And it's just that fact, not the awareness of such, but it is the fact of the loss that constitutes the misfortune. This is what he calls the historical account of misfortune. And it says that some things that are unfortunate can only be seen as such by comparing the past to the current state of the individual. So by looking at the fact that they were alive, enjoying the goods of life, and now they are not, we see the misfortune as it is. The historical account of misfortune allows us to account for losses that have to do with degradation from one point in time to another. So like if a person has $1 million in their account on December 31st this year, and I ask you, is this a good fortune or a misfortune? You might be too quick to say it's a good fortune because we actually would have to know information about where they were before that. If on January 1st they had $1, then yes, this is a rags to riches story because they went from $1 to $1 million. But if they had $1 billion on January 1st and now it's $1 million on December 31st, they've actually lost 99% of their wealth, and that would be a huge misfortune. So the same state, being infantile in the way you're acting, could be either no misfortune or a misfortune, depending on what we can compare it to in the past. For the actual infant, there's no loss. For the man who's now in an infantile state because of head trauma, there is that loss. And so that also explains why there are different attitudes towards non-existence later versus non-existence prior to conception. Because non-existence after your life is a state that we can compare with the prior state of your life. Non-existence prior to conception, fair enough, was a time you didn't exist. But it's not a loss yet because we cannot compare it with the fact of having existed before. And so therefore he concludes that despite these criticisms, yes, there is still something that's a misfortune about dying if it is the case that there's no future conscious survival. So I'm just going to end with this last comment then. If that's what he's saying is true, then we should all hope for the afterlife. Because if not, then death is a bad thing, according at least to one author's analysis, although it's not undisputed. And maybe there will be an afterlife, but we'll find out, I guess, one way or the other. So the class is done. We've done all of our notes, and we've talked about all the essays. So you have the study guide. We'll go over those study guide questions in the next 2 lecture periods, Wednesday and Friday. And then we'll take our exam next week. So I'm working through grading your guys' essays now, and I'll be in touch with you as the week goes on when I'm done. But for the moment, I guess I'll close the stream. We're a little over time. Sorry for that. Just wanted to get all the notes in. But are we good to go? If so, just let me know, and then I'll see you back on Wednesday next time. So are we good? Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, everybody. And I really do appreciate all of your hard work and dedication in philosophy and in life. So I'll see you then back on Wednesday. Okay, bye-bye.